So thank you, Dirk, for an interesting paper. I'm going to begin being a bit critical and then maybe start from the main point that I saw that you could still work on. As you said, this is a working paper, so I've been trying to really push you a bit. I think there are two promises that you make and you don't really meet in your paper. And I'm not sure if you can, but I challenge you to do it, or at least to try. So the first one is that you make a very true criticism, in my opinion at least, regarding previous research, that it does not consider the way the new laws actually affect only certain cohorts, so those who are affected by the new regulations. So I think it would really be useful to look at these specific cohorts, but you do not say enough on which cohorts the law really speaks about. And I know from my knowledge on the German society, at least, that it is really cohort-specific sometimes. So if you want to make that claim, it's fine, but you need, I think, to be more demonstrative about it and tell us about which cohorts you expect to be more affected by it in which countries and so on and so forth. Because otherwise it's difficult to understand whether you're really looking at what you want to look here. The second one is that you say that the new cohort should be more affected by changes. This is correct, but maybe if this is what we really want to look at, and I think as researchers we should try to look at that, maybe a comparison should be made between former cohorts and new cohorts regarding this question. Of course, this is the problem because the former cohorts are probably already in retirement, but maybe look retrospectively at some point or explain why this is not possible. But if this is where the paper is going, be more clear about that. Regarding the economic crisis, I think it's a very important point and a very important contribution. However, I'm not sure regarding the real contribution of this crisis theoretically. Maybe more specifically, I would say one could maybe use a time series cross-sectional method to do a before and after comparison, before crisis, after crisis. Additionally, I did not see any theoretical logic to consider the crisis because the mechanisms that you expect to be at work here because of the crisis are anyway conceptualized in your paper in terms of economic instability that is captured well, I think, by unemployment or through the unemployment rates in the country. So if this is how you want to measure the crisis, I'm not sure what we see here, because there is clearly an effect of unemployment rate. There is clearly also, at least among the women, an effect of unemployment. So is it really the crisis or not? Tough to answer, I think. Another point is that until now, at least, and I understand this is a work in progress, so maybe this is coming next, but you seem to expect individual level factors to work the same well across all countries. They're all fixed. And I'm wondering why it doesn't make sense to you to maybe derive clearer hypotheses regarding differences between countries in individual effects. I would personally try to focus on family status, gender effects maybe, which might have different processes in different countries, potentially union membership in some countries where unions are stronger, in some countries they are not so strong. Maybe try to do something with that. One comment that I've written here, because I read your paper, but I saw in the model that you already dismissed it, and I think you did it for a good reason. You mention in the paper that there is reason to think that the size of the firm is associated with retirement age. It doesn't have an effect. And I'm also wondering how strong the theoretical expectation is. So in your position, I think the model is complicated enough. You have enough going on there. I would simply leave that out, as you did in this presentation. I would like to see more information on family, if they have children or not. As I told you already in the break, whether they have grandchildren or not. I think these are important questions, and I think grandchildren information is included in the ESS, or at least it was included in one of the waves. So this is something I would also try to look at. I would like to hear more about conditions of unemployment. Unemployment can sometimes be used as an informal transition stage before retirement. It's a tricky business, I know, but it's something worth noting at least in the paper, because unemployment works in the way that you see that it's working. Maybe we should also consider that. And then once again think about making it a random effect between countries, because in some countries it might work, in other countries it may not work. You underline main earner issues and a gender effect here. I think tapping into this issue, there are two explanations probably for the association that you mentioned between being married and retirement age among the women. I think the first one, as you mentioned, is probably that married women can simply afford to retire earlier. They have the men to keep on providing for the household. But I think, and it also speaks to the comment that Avia Spivak made before about norms, that this could also play a role. It might be more important for the woman to retire before the men to maintain the typical gendered role division in the household. So it would be unthinkable for a woman to overwork her husband, so to say. Maybe worth thinking about it. In some countries it might be, I don't know, but I think it's worth looking at least. Finally, two more small comments. I think your findings really show that in the way that you currently measure the crisis, it may not have the added value that you would expect, because it probably all works through this unemployment issue, which might go anyway through the central mechanism that you discussed earlier. So I'm not sure what is really going on here. And a question for you I think a question for all of us to think about here. There is still some variability or variance left in the data. And I'm wondering, what is the role of ageism in this story of early retirement in Europe at all, and considering the fact that they are trying to increase retirement age, but I'm not sure if enough is done, if there is at all a problem of ageism at workplaces in Europe. I know that some studies are being now conducted in the US about the issue of firing people because they are old, and I think a hint in this direction might be what we see with regard to long life learning here, because if elderly people or older workers, older employees get the right skills, then ageism might be somewhat softened, because at least the boss cannot anymore make the claim that it's because they're unskilled or their skills do not fit current expectations and so on. So maybe this is something to think about or discuss. I don't know if ESS has any information about that, but if it doesn't, then maybe it's time to give a recommendation to have some. That's it. Thank you very much.
Questions?
Thank you. Just to make no, it works. Maybe I missed it, but do you have any measure of socioeconomic status? Like, I was wondering that the economic situation of the person, it will be maybe perhaps the most important variable, if you can afford to retire or not. Maybe I miss it.
Yeah, I also have a quick question. When you talked about the unemployment insurance, the unemployment insurance enrollment as an indicator for the crisis, I'm a bit worried there, because first of all, it depends which country we're talking about. So it's really, I think there is a big issue with country-specific effects going on, and I think that's severe. And also the question that I'm having is, who is left? Who are the people that we're talking about? So these are people who are still active, right? So what is their desire? But in some countries, you might have relatively small groups only left, at some point in time. So I'm wondering, is there another selection issue going on also selectively in some of these countries? So just a thought.
All right. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for all these very helpful comments. I think quite a few of the problems I have are related to the nature of the data set, in a sense, which is a cross-sectional data set from 2010. Unfortunately, exactly this question was not included in the earlier wave from which this ESS 2010 is being just a replication, which was 2004. If I would have that, then it would be really perfect, first of all, in specifying more in a more differentiated way the cohorts, which is a problem with just one cross-sectional data, because cohort is directly related to age, and age basically is a factor that drives the selectivity of my sample as such. So this is definitely a problem when analyzing that, and it also is a problem for considering adequately the influence of the economic crisis, because at least from the ESS I don't have an equal measure what has happened before. I could combine it to other studies like the Eurobarometer, which included such indicators of desired retirement ages before, but with the 2010 data I'm really limited to basically this view on just one larger retirement cohort instead of making comparisons across time and cohorts. And also I'm limited to retrospective information before and after the economic crisis. I try to include it as differentiated as possible with other indicators looking at how the household is affected, whether one had to make cuts, for example, whether the situation of the firm was insecure. So it went beyond unemployment as such in the very initial version, but all of these indicators didn't prove to be correlated basically to the desire to retire, which I then interpreted in a sense that I said, like, okay, it's more about being really directly affected than having rather an abstract image of what the crisis could mean, but it is really about losing the own individual employment security and financial security associated with that. So that is a problem, but as I said, a bit induced by the data set. Including children and grandchildren and looking a bit more differentiated on families and family norms is a good idea. And I think this could be done with the data, and I definitely will include that in later phases. And one could at least infer data from a previous ESS wave on ageism, so that one can look at least on the national level on which it is prevalent. So not within the same wave, but I think this could at least include some more differentiated view on ageism. With regard to socioeconomic status, I only include education in the model, but this appeared to be highly correlated, at least what I have from pay and income data. So once I include education, none of these additional indicators about the financial situation of the household or the individual was still significant anymore. However, yeah.
It's negative but I think it's and I think that if you're talking about ageism and that, of course there is the expectation that you could continue working.
Yeah.
There's the relationship, the natural relationship between
Absolutely.
the education and the possibility to continue.
That's a good point, yeah. And I think that could make a strong argument really in favor of pushing those people out that would want to stay the most. So I think I should consider that, at least theoretically. Empirically, as I said, it's a bit leveled out by the indicator I use. I also include the occupational status alternatively, and the story is more or less the same, but it's a good point which I will take on board. Yeah, I think that's the major issues.